being alone in this vast desert, it gave me a sense of perspective on kind of the human condition and my place in the universe, if you will. And rather than feeling infinitesimally small and therefore unimportant, what it did is it just made me feel connected to the rest of the universe, to the rest of humanity. And just having that perspective gave me this sense of inner peace and humility, which I think was the beginning of the healing process. So that started relatively early on in those first few days of the desert.
Today on the show, we're joined with author Aryeh Green. He is the author of the book My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, which was written after an incredible journey he took through the Israel Trail on foot. Took him 8 weeks. And it was inspired when he was going through some low points of his life, feeling shook up from a divorce, and throughout the journey, experiencing such amazing revelations and reflections through both beauty and hardships along the way. This is such an amazing story, and I was honored to pick his brain. I feel like I got a lot out of this interview, and if you do too, and you want to get an even further in-depth look into his journey, you can purchase the book My Israel Trail. That's available everywhere where books are sold. But without further ado, we're going to get right into this interview. He's actually living in Israel right now and was about 7 hours ahead my time. It was afternoon for me, the nighttime for him. And we jump in right after I asked the question, what initially sparked this journey? So here we go.
Well, the truth is, the first time that I thought about doing it was when a friend, children of some friends of mine, or I would say friends of my children of my friends, there are all sorts of different younger generation kids, as it were, 20, 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds after their national service or their service in the Israel Defense Forces, went, on this trek, and I joined some of them, a day here and a day there. The truth is, hiking culture is really embedded in Israeli society. From a young age, every school child has every year an annual trip, at least one, often two or three. And as a father of young children growing up, I used to go every year with each of my three children, at least one or two trips a year. And the schools loved it when I could come with them and be an accompanying adult, because I'm trained as a medic. And you have to have a medic along on any of these trips with your school, school regulations, and you have to have unfortunately, because of the reality we live here in Israel and the Middle East, you have to have an armed guard. I happen to have a gun license, so that was kind of killing two birds with one stone, literally. And also I play the guitar, and so it was good to have around and handy to have around for an evening to help the kids calm down and have a bit of entertainment. So I used to do that, probably six to 9 times a year. And also we took family hikes and trips around Israel. And I did so also in California growing up. Yosemite, the California coastal range, day hikes here or there, even a few 1 or 2 night overnights. So a kind of hiking, walking, certainly here in Israel, walking the land of our ancestors is really, as I said, part of our culture. But the real impetus, you mentioned the divorce, and I was finalizing a very devastating divorce in my life, a divorce I hadn't looked for, which we can talk about later perhaps. Wasn't my choice. And my daughter who had just finished her national service, her service in the IDF, we took a little trip. We went to Barcelona. We went to visit my folks and old friends and family in California, and we hiked in Yosemite. We hiked up Half Dome. Sean, are you familiar with Half Dome?
I'm not actually.
So I don't know, you or our viewers, our listeners may or may not be familiar, but Half Dome is a granite mountain, literally sliced in half in Yosemite National Park. It kind of looms over Yosemite Valley, and it's an excruciatingly difficult hike up to the top of Half Dome, including literally scaling the back of this almost vertical granite slab, which takes itself a good 3 hours or so from the bottom to the top, in addition to the at least 4 or 5 hours just to get there to the base camp. We did it in 2 different days overnight, my daughter and I. But the point is that you kind of clamber up the side of this granite mountain, holding on to cables, and the wind buffeting you. So you might, you're really in fear of falling off. People have
Oh,
fallen and
wow. Yeah,
died.
that sounds so scary in a way.
It really, really was. It was one of the most difficult, one of the most challenging, both physically challenging, but also emotionally and psychologically challenging things I think I've ever done. Certainly that my daughter Maria had ever done. And we got to the top of it, and I basically looked at her. Obviously, we were celebrating. It was just, in jubilation. We did it. Wonderful. And I looked at her, and I said, you know what? This, this has really given me the impetus. I'm going to hike the trail.
Oh,
And this
wow.
was, and that was that decision was just a few months before the divorce was finalized. We knew that that was imminent. And so that's basically what pushed me to then, start the preparations in earnest. And then I was out on the trail just a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. So
yeah, I can see that giving you the confidence with your own mind and body from like just that big feat of doing the mountain. It's like, okay, what else can I do? Can we do this trail? And like, if that was something in the back of your mind, is kind of giving you that spirit where like, I'm going to go for it and I can do this type of thing.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And it's like you mentioned too, like the trail took you 8 weeks, and that's astonishing to me, to actually go out there and do that. And like prior to like just wanting to do it, like did you know you were going to have all these like certain reflections and everything that you've kind of put out in your book? And like did you expect it to be the experience that you got, or was it something totally different?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer is no. I did not expect it. The original impetus to go was after 3 years or so of dealing with the divorce and the difficulties that engendered, and the breaking up of our family and what have you, and having talked incessantly to therapists, to friends, to my former wife, to the family, what have you. I just wanted to get out. And as somebody told me many weeks later on the trail, to sum up what was a 3-year process of agonizing introspection and challenging, personal growth issues. This fellow who met me on the trail said, "Oh, I understand. You just want to clear your head." And that was basically the impetus, just to get out and to start this trek. And no, I did not anticipate. I certainly didn't expect to write a book about the experience, but I didn't anticipate the depth and the power and the poignancy of the different lessons that I learned on the trail, and the resulting real healing. I think for me, it was much more of an escape. I hadn't anticipated the kind of revelations that I would or epiphanies that I would experience as I was hiking over the course of those 8 weeks. And yeah, I had never done anything like this. I mean, as I mentioned, I hiked as a kid, as a college student. I worked at a summer camp near Yosemite, and out there in the Sierras, I would do backpacking, for a night, for 2 nights. That was the extent of my. So the idea of doing a trek of what basically was 48 days of hiking, 48 and not 54, because I didn't hike on the Jewish Sabbath, on Shabbat. So I hiked 6 days a week for 8 weeks running. And I had never done such a thing. Looking back on it now, I know I wrote in my journal on that very first day, what the heck am I doing?
yeah, I can imagine. It's like
wow, is this crazy idea?
Stepping out into the unknown in a way where you're just like, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? And I also want to ask, I'm sorry to cut you off with that.
That's okay.
There's a little tiny delay with the time, but
yeah, that's right. No, I was just going to say it wasn't even a question of, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? There was no question that first day, the challenges that I faced just on that very first day, it was a bad idea. Terrible idea. What am I doing here? I mean, I was 51 years old. Okay, the usual cohort that hikes the Israel Trail is 21 years old, as I mentioned, and I'm doing this trail with a 50-pound pack on my back, all alone.
Mm.
And there's no question that was my conclusion that first day is this is the craziest thing anybody has ever done.
Yeah, I want to ask too, like before you set out and everything, like what was it like packing that bag? I can imagine you're trying to hit all the essentials, but also maybe you want like maybe some reading material. You gotta maybe bring the gun, maybe the guitar. Like, do I leave the guitar? Like, I can imagine like it's being a difficult part too, just hoping you're prepared for that trek.
Well, I did do a certain amount of preparation. First of all, I read there's kind of an informal, unofficial, but still the primary guide to hiking the Israel Trail, which is called the Red Book informally, the guide to hiking the Israel National Trail. And I had read it thoroughly, both in English and in Hebrew, to get an idea of what I was up against. I had to arrange for a number of different food and water drops, some of which I went ahead and buried or hid some non-perishable foodstuffs and water bottles in various places on our drive down. And I had to arrange for desert tour companies to ensure that I had water resupplies in certain areas where I wasn't going to be able to supply myself over the course of a day or two or three in the initial 3 weeks of the hike in the desert. And I was in relatively good shape for a 51-year-old. I bike maybe 3-4 times a week, not extensively, but for an hour or two in the hills here, the foothills of the Jerusalem mountains, where I live. And so, in fact, it's dark now, so I can't show you. For our listening audience, I will just say I'm panning the camera behind me and over to the hills. What you see in the distance here from my roof balcony is just after the sunset, the kind of last rays of light there in the dark sky, and silhouetted are the foothills of the Jerusalem mountains. We're looking
It's
now
very beautiful
to the west.
Yeah, even when we started to see that sunset, it was cool to kind of watch it go down behind you. Good ambiance for the interview.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to do it, and not just in my study. I wanted to do it out here in the sukkah, in our tabernacle. We'll talk about that in a second. But so I did. I was in relatively good shape because I did a decent amount of biking, but I also did a few test hikes, including putting about 50 pounds of rocks in my backpack and walking 15 miles to make sure that the kind of schedule that I had mapped out for myself based on the red guide was doable, that I wasn't biting off more than I could chew. Of course, what I didn't realize, or what I didn't think about, or I didn't measure properly, was hiking through these low-lying hills in the foothills of the Jerusalem mountain range for 15 miles with 50 pounds on my back was doable. And I did it in the course of 8 hours. I knew I could do about 5 kilometers an hour, which is, I guess, 3 miles an hour or so. But I didn't take into account that wasn't in the heat of the desert or the cold rain hail of the Jerusalem hills, and it wasn't a sense of 1,000 yards, 1,000 meters.
Because I wasn't even thinking till now, like the desert, extremely hot in the day, freezing at night, and that's gotta be such a tough thing to handle with as well.
Well, it's true. When you talk about the physical hike itself, there are all sorts of different elements that you have to take into account. But on the other hand, I started out in the mid-February, which is maybe 2 weeks prior to the really kind of unofficial opening of the season. But that's the way the seasonal hikes work, is that if you want to start in the south in the desert, you start at the end of winter. So it's not quite that hot. You're not talking about 100, 110 degree heat in the desert. You're talking about 80, 85, reasonable heat. Although when you're hiking with 50 pounds in your back, it still feels pretty impressive. But if you want to,
very impressive.
So no, oppressive, I said, but
oppressive. I thought, sorry.
Yeah. The heat, but so there are ways, obviously, that you mitigate some of the geographical and weather issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you set out on this hike, When did it start becoming, or when did you know it was starting to become like a mental healing experience? Was it a few days in? Was it a weekend?
You know, it's a good question, and partially because I obviously relate to this in some detail in the book. Um, it was probably not the first day, but the first few days where it dawned on me. I do remember, I don't know if I mentioned this in the book, but I do remember in the first day, as I set out from, I literally walked out of the hotel that a friend and I had stayed over the Sabbath, over Shabbat and Sunday morning, walked from there with my backpack and started out on the trek, because that's where the trail starts, is just literally across the street from where this hotel is on the Red Sea, on the Gulf of Eilat. And I remember explicitly going up through something called Wadi Shlomo, which is the Valley of Solomon. And about a few hours into it, saying to myself, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And recognizing, in spite of what I said earlier about that was later that day, that I was saying to myself, are you crazy? Because I got caught on the side of a mountain where I wasn't sure where I was going. And I was literally fearful because it was so steep, and I was worried about not getting to my night camp that night where the water was, where I could pitch my tent. But certainly within those first few days in the desert, I experienced a great sense of humility, of being alone and being surrounded by the universe and being in the midst of this silent trudging, step after step, minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day, almost overwhelming silence, which could have been frightening, but instead was incredibly calming and liberating.
Yeah.
Because, even though I'm not saying, I mean, my problems, my suffering, my anguish, the pain I was feeling, the anger, it was all real. So it wasn't minimized, but being alone in this vast desert on my own, it gave me a sense of perspective on kind of the human condition and my place in the universe, if you will. And rather than feeling infinitesimally small and therefore unimportant, what it did is it just made me feel connected to the rest of the universe, to the rest of humanity. And just having that perspective gave me this sense of inner peace and humility, which I think was the beginning of the healing process. So that started relatively early on in those first few days of the desert.
That's so beautiful to me. I find just in life in general, especially me, like living in the city, there's always constant noise around you too. And it's almost makes me think, it's like, what is my own thoughts too, if I was just left alone with that? You kind of cut out for a second here. Are you still there?
Oh, I don't know why.
Oh yeah. Oh well, your audio is still there, so that's good.
Okay.
So,
now that happens sometimes.
yeah, it's all
Hold
good.
on. There's a way I can get it back. There we go.
There you are.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry
but
about that.
yeah, no problem. But yeah, just kind of what I was saying. It's interesting to see like your own perspective if you're only left like with your own thoughts. I seen like places pop up in the city that's getting pretty popular, like they have like the isolation like float tanks type of things too, but it's still like you go to these places and there's people around you and everything, but to
Yes.
truly
Yes.
be alone in the desert just looking up at the stars and I can imagine that almost unlocks like a certain part of your mind that maybe you're not utilizing day to day. Would you agree with that, or is that part of your experience? Or
Without question. I mean,
yeah.
I've practiced different forms of meditation over different phases in my life, and most frequently and most intensely in those few years leading up to the divorce, and that led directly into the hike itself. I went on a silent meditation retreat 6 months prior to the hike, a 4-day silent meditation retreat, where both I learned some new practices, which came in very handy, and also was kind of the beginning of this desire for kind of less talk and more introspection, less trying to work things out verbally and more just seeking that kind of inner sense of calm and peace and stability and harmony. And so the desert, the 3 weeks that began the trek for me were instrumental in creating that kind of an inner. In fact, it's funny. I took a photo of myself meditating, or just after meditating, on the side of a cliff in the Negev desert, and I sent it to a friend of mine who happens to be a psychologist, a therapist. I said to him, "Hey, Moshe, this is a picture of me meditating on a mountaintop," and he writes me back saying, "Aryeh, this entire trek is just one long meditation."
Yeah.
And that certainly became, that became true.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm sure you mentioned it in your book as well, but I kind of touched on, like, when did it start becoming a healing process for you? What were kind of some of the things that were opening up inward, like the knowledge you were receiving from being, as you mentioned, just one with yourself and the universe, and feeling that way as well?
Well, as I recount in the book, and as I really do like talking about, there were basically 5 lessons that I learned from the physical trek itself. In other words, these weren't just ephemeral kind of ideas that came to me. They came out of specific experiences in the physical hike, like the silence of the desert, which led to this understanding of how important it is to have a sense of humility, having a sense of perspective, a modest perspective of our place in the universe. And that opened me up to all 4 of the other elements. And the second element was a sense of acceptance of the reality that I was facing. And that day that I already mentioned, it was the first day that I was on the side of this mountain, and I felt like I couldn't go any further. I had taken a route, a trail that the trail guide had suggested, if you have the time, you should go this way because the views are breathtaking. And I chose to do so out of my ignorance of not knowing how steep it was going to be, because I didn't bother checking the elevation charts. And also my ignorance of not really recognizing how on the first day of a trek like this, with a 50, but did I mention I had a 50-pound pack on my back?
Yeah.
You might not want to take a side little tangent. You want to get
a little side
to
quest here and there.
Exactly. You might want to just get to your base camp, to your night camp, and find your water that you buried there a couple of days before, and make sure you're okay. Anyway, I was on the side of this mountain, and I basically started crying. I was going hand over boulders twice my size with this 50-pound pack on my back. First day out, it started to rain. It was hot. This is the desert, but yes, it does rain occasionally in the desert. And I was, I just sat down and I started to cry, because I was really, really not panicking, but not sure what the hell I was doing, or whether I was going to make it. And I thought even of calling my son to call out the IDF's rescue, Air Force rescue helicopters to come take me off the side of this mountain.
Wow.
Like, what am I doing here? So instead of that, what I did is I took myself in hand and I said, you know what, Aryeh, you're on the side of a mountain. Nobody's going to come and take you off the side of this mountain. And you really do have a challenge to get to your night camp. And water is, not an insignificant element here while you're in the desert. Forget about food or a comfortable tent and sleeping bag. You're going to have to figure out a way out of this. And that sense of an acceptance of the reality that I found myself in, not least because I had taken a bad decision, to try out this tangential route without really knowing what the parameters were and how long it would take and how difficult it would be. And I basically said to myself, all right, this is your reality. You made a bad decision. Accept that and try and figure out what is a better decision now. What's the right decision now? Retrace your steps, go out to the road and hitchhike. There's 45 minutes away. I could have found a road and hitched to where the night camp was. Retrace your steps and take the other route instead of the gentle road, or push on because you know that there's another path that you can find that'll take you to the night camp. And I wrote in my journal that night, Sean, and this is kind of interesting because when I came around to writing the book, I went through the journal and I found and reminded myself or rediscovered things I hadn't even remembered. Some neighbors' dogs are barking.
Yeah, no problem.
Forgive the background music. And I wrote in my journal that night, just as I had to, and I made it, by the way. I made it to the night camp that night after dark, for the record, with my forehead lamp and guiding the way. But I wrote in my journal that night, that was not even a metaphor. That was a direct lesson that's applicable to my general situation. It's not just about, acceptance of the reality you find yourself on the side of a mountain. You're divorced. And I was somebody who saw marriages for life. I never saw myself as being divorced. I have nothing against divorce as a concept. Obviously, there are some couples, there are some relationships that ought to go their separate ways, and that can be very healthy. In my case, that wasn't the case, neither in terms of my attitude towards marriage, nor, as far as I was concerned, throughout the process, was it necessary with regard to my relationship with my former wife. But as I wrote in my journal that night, Aryeh, you didn't expect this to happen, but this is your reality. You are divorced. You have to accept this reality in order to try and figure out, what your next steps are. So that was the second lesson that I learned that was very powerful, directly from experience on the trail. And I can go into the other three if you'd like, but I don't know if you want the conversation to go in a different direction.
Yeah. No, I love this. And I love hearing that lesson of just total acceptance too, because I believe that's the first step to healing a broken heart, or like anything. Like this goes beyond like your journey too, like just in life too. It's like I'm even thinking of like times where I've just felt flustered and frustrated and like almost trying to mask the problem in a way, and then just finally like taking a breath and being like, no, this is the reality. That almost, it's like it turns into something that you were running from. It turns into like a weight off your shoulders in a way, and it's like, now I can tackle this with a clear head. And
absolutely. And I said that the experience in the desert, which could have been overwhelming, was in fact liberating, and it's definitely part and parcel. The humility that I gained in those first few days and weeks was married to, and was a basis for, the acceptance that I achieved then as kind of a second step. And there's no question that also really, as you say, it just frees up your psyche, your mind, your emotions to give you the space to explore whatever the issues are that you're dealing with, whether they're emotional or more abstract, and it frees you up, instead of carrying, the burden of trying to figure out why this is happening to me. Just accepting it with a sense of humility, enables you then to look a bit more forward.
Yeah, even you're making me kind of like reflect on like some moments in my life. And I had a moment where there was a legit eviction notice on my door. I moved to the big city. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I thought I was going to leave the city. And I'm a videographer as well. And I had this one dream gig on the weekend. I'm like, okay, I might not be in the city for this much longer, but I'm just gonna just accept my situation and just do this and be present in the moment. And that thing led to me so many different connections where it ended up fixing my problem and like pushing forward too. It's just kind of like I don't know, of like a magical lesson from the universe, and like almost in a weird cosmic timing way as well too. It's really hard to explain in a short form, but just there's power in acceptance, in like stepping forward and with a clear head and just just going with it too. And it's
very
really
very much so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned too, there was other moments of different lessons as well. Like I'd love to hear about that as well.
So, um, well, just in brief, the third lesson, which
Mhm.
was also very much associated with the first two of humility and acceptance, was the sense of appreciation that I developed over the course of also those first 3 or 4 weeks, especially as I began to move from the Negev desert into the lower Hebron and Jerusalem hills, where it was more green, more foresty, and also nearing my hometown, which is where I'm speaking to you from now, in the Jerusalem hills, where my thoughts were turning towards my family, my kids,
Mm.
my extended family, my parents, and my brother, also my friends who, because I have no family here in Israel for the last 35 years, our friends really are our family, who had all supported me very, very strongly in the whole process of the divorce, and of course, also in the trek itself. And the gratitude and appreciation that I felt. I mean, this was just enhanced. I'd always felt very appreciative of the blessings in my life, but from the trail itself, again, I say the physical trail was the impetus for every one of these lessons, and for this one, I remember again. It's funny. I'm one of those guys who cries and admits it, so. It's funny to hear myself mentioning again. I cried. I actually had tears running down my cheeks when I saw the first flower that I came across
Oh.
in this geographical transition from the desert of the northern Negev into the Jerusalem hills. There's this beautiful purple flower, which I took a photo of. And I was just so overwhelmed with appreciation for the beauty and the life force,
Mm.
um, to a certain extent, coming out of the grays and the browns and the yellows and the black rock of the desert into this kind of shock of color in front of me, which obviously had a wider meaning for me in terms of the reinvigoration of life and the reassertion of the power of life to me, and that got me thinking a lot about the appreciation and gratitude that I had and have for all the blessings in my life. And so that was the third lesson: how important it is that we not just be grateful, but that we express that appreciation, whether it's in our prayers, which as a traditional and observant Jew, I do every morning with the prayer Modeh Ani, which is in Hebrew, I am thankful uh, for all the blessings in my life, or whether we express it to the people that we're grateful for. And for me, that included trail angels, who are individuals or small groups that host through hikers on the Israel Trail to come and stay in their house, and they feed us and give us a bed and do our laundry and give us a shower, and run us back to the trailhead in the morning as necessary, and for no pay, absolutely
Oh,
free.
wow.
And so the gratitude that I felt, whether it was for a flower or for the trail angels or what have you, obviously it translated into the feelings and reinforced and enhanced the feelings of gratitude that I had for my family and my life.
Yeah.
And so that was the third lesson. And the truth is, which leads me to the fourth lesson. The truth is, I was grateful even to my former wife,
Mm.
um, but both in general, being full of gratitude for the 30 years or so that we had spent together, raised three beautiful, wonderful, intelligent, and creative and loving children, to the faith-based home that we had created together here in Israel, my wife having come from England, me having come from America, the communities that we helped to build, just the appreciation that I felt to her for our life together, which we had built together, which no one can take away from us, irrespective of the dissolution of the marriage. Um, that was a very important point, a very important part. In fact, it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but I was grateful to her for the divorce, which enabled me to have this amazing experience of hiking the Israel Trail, which I never would have done if I
Yeah,
hadn't
for
needed this kind of healing from the trauma of the divorce.
Yeah, for sure. It like turned into something beautiful, and
Yeah, it really did. And so as difficult as that sounds, or as counterintuitive it sounds, I was grateful to her, but it kind of, that leads to this fourth element, because um I still was carrying a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of pain and suffering for the pain and suffering that she had caused to me and to our kids and to our wider family, and breaking up our family. I want you to understand, and I think it's important that your listeners and our viewers also understand. Intellectually, I understood. My former wife was an adult. She had a right to make whatever decision she was going to make that was right for her. Um, so at the level of kind of the intellectual argument, especially as somebody who considers myself very much a feminist, in the purest sense in the world, in terms of the word, in terms of promoting a woman's right to any and every decision that she would want to make or take about herself, her life, her body, or what have you. Um, I hadn't rejected or objected to her right to take this decision. I didn't feel it was necessary. We had a long and beautiful marriage, friendship, romance, love affair. We were the exemplary example, the paradigm of a loving partnership for all of our friends, for our children, for our family. And when my former wife said she wanted a divorce, it came literally out of nowhere. And I know that's a little bit kind of, it sounds one-sided, but as I described in my book, with her permission, what it turns out afterwards was discovered is that she was suffering from depression, and she was basically very extremely sad and depressed, and she couldn't figure out why. And she kind of fixated on, well, if I leave the marriage, then then I'll be happy. And by the time she was diagnosed, it was too late. She was already committed to the path of divorce. There was like a 2-week hiatus there, where kind of
oh
we
yeah.
both said, oh, this changes everything, this diagnosis. But after 2 weeks, she said, you know what? Even if now I understand that it's not the marriage that was the cause of my anguish, I still want to get divorced. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's just
um,
the decision has been made, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
actually
and I've
that's interesting you explain that too, because this isn't the first example I've heard of that too, where or even seen like a relationship kind of end out of nowhere, and it's just going through somebody's mind of trying to figure out why they're feeling sad, and they think it was a relationship, and then later on realizing that wasn't the root of the problem, and just trying
well,
to search and scramble and reorganize and see if that works almost in a way. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I mean, obviously, every situation is unique. From my perspective, that it was incomprehensible to me throughout the entire process that whatever the issues were that were troubling my former wife, that we couldn't resolve them, not just amicably, but lovingly and together and in partnership and with help from therapists, to salvage and to reinvigorate the love that we had shared for so many years. Unfortunately, that was not to be. But what happened for me on the trek was I was hiking along the border with Lebanon in the north, in the fifth week of the trek. And because there are many Arab villages there in the north of Israel, and this border with Lebanon was literally right there next to me as I walked. Um, we haven't really talked about my background, but I happen to have a master's in international relations, and I've spent a lot of my academic career and professional career looking at and discussing and thinking about, talking about the Arab-Israel conflict. And so it was natural for me over the course of those weeks hiking along the border with Lebanon, the north of Israel, where there are very sizable communities of Arab Israelis, mostly Muslim, some Christian, that my thoughts were turning to how we could perhaps see and find ways to move ahead with a real resolution of the Arab-Israel conflict. And one of the key components that I came to was the absolute necessity for a process of forgiveness between Arabs, Arab Muslims, Arabs in the region, Arab Israelis, Palestinians, and others, in terms of a forgiveness of Israel, our insistence on our existence, our insistence on our defending ourselves. Obviously, the results of our military, our defensive military operations, which cause and still cause injury and death and property destruction, have you. And that there needs to be a process of forgiveness in the same way that Jews and Israelis and Jews around the world have to forgive the Arabs for their century-long, more than a century now, effort to annihilate us, and their constant violent hostility to our very existence, let alone our right to an independent state, and their terrorist attacks, and they're killing our children and our parents, and the wars that they engendered, and that's where my thoughts were as I was walking through the north. And at one point in particular, I won't go into the details, there was a particular kind of very immediate and poignant experience I had that enabled me to transition from an academic kind of intellectual sense of forgiveness of my former wife to a real heart or gut level forgiveness of her. And that was so crucial for me in terms of my healing, was to move that one step beyond the forgiveness I had already achieved to a really heartfelt level of forgiveness of her for basically destroying our family, and causing so much pain and suffering. And for me, if I said that the humility and the acceptance was liberating in the desert, this was an overwhelming sense of relief that really enabled, I think, the final, that fourth element was the final element in my healing, and that left me the last 2 weeks of the trek to work on the fifth element that we can talk about in the second.
Yeah. It's really interesting too. It seems like the longer you're on this trek too, it seems like just whether it's like the healing and knowledge, it keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper as you go on. And it's like you mentioned that feeling of forgiveness. Like, have you ever felt anything like that in your entire life, or is this just like its own unique like feeling within your heart inside of you?
Yes, and yes, I had felt it before. Yes, it was unique in terms of this full-hearted, so deep sense of forgiveness. And the reason for the former, the reason I'm saying yes to the former, that has come before, is that in Jewish tradition, in our religious tradition, in fact, this was just now a week ago, we commemorated and celebrated Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which in the Jewish calendar is the peak of our high holiday season, or our New Year reflective period as individuals and as a community. And one of the very important elements of Yom Kippur, the word Kippur in Hebrew means atonement. And the idea of asking and giving forgiveness is enshrined in our religious tradition and our faith, as well as in our communal life as a nation, for over 2,000-3,000 years. And every year, when I speak to my parents, my spouse, my children, my friends, and ask their forgiveness for any harm or any ill will or any offense that I've committed over the previous year, that's always heartfelt. That's not just a kind of a ceremonial sentence that rolls off the tongue and you kind of check that box. Okay, I've asked for forgiveness and I've received forgiveness, but it's a spiritually deep and meaningful process. And so I can't say that the concept of forgiveness that I was thinking about when I was walking in the north, and that then translated into this kind of epiphany that I had with regard to my former wife, that it was new, or that it was so very unique. But yes, as you said, the depth of the experience was without question very different than the intellectual level that I had basically accepted and carried with me in the final months leading up to the finalization of the divorce and after it. So it was a real turning point. It really was.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So you mentioned right now you're 5 weeks in. What's kind of going through your mind? You're like past the halfway point. It's like home stretch. Are you like feeling like, hey, this is such a beneficial journey. I wish this walk was forever, or are you just feeling like I can't wait to get back home? Like how are
Oh
you
no,
feeling?
that's actually it's your question, Sean, is so on target, because it was at that point, those last few weeks, where there were two or three things happening simultaneously. One was, even though I had said to myself at the outset, "Hey, I'm really going to do this," once I got to that fifth, sixth week, and I only had 2, 3 weeks to go, I knew, wow, I'm really doing this. I'm going to finish this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Come this far, of course I'm going to continue. I was walking then from the border in the north down toward through the Galilee, out to the coast, down the coast to Tel Aviv, and then hiking literally inland, literally to walk into my community to come back home by foot, on foot. I wasn't going to end the trek and then take a bus or a taxi or have somebody drive me home. I was walking actually home, and that walking home meant that I had this feeling of going home, of completion, and that then engendered exactly the question that you raised. So what's going to happen next? And on one hand, yes, I wish I could keep going. I would have loved to have kept going. In fact, I'm committed to doing the trail again, which we'll perhaps talk about at the end of our conversation.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Because I really would have loved to have just kept going, partially because it wasn't just enjoyable and incredibly meaningful to be walking in the footsteps of our prophets and ancestors, but it was, of course, also free of any care, free of any responsibility. I didn't have to worry about if there was a leaky faucet at home. I had taken vacation from my work. My kids were all, over the age of 18 and didn't need me in any immediate sense. I obviously was now divorced, so I had no responsibilities
Yeah,
to a
yeah.
wife or at home. But the interesting thing about your question is it really does pinpoint that last 2 weeks. I basically said to myself, well, hold on a second, Arya. You're going to finish this trek, and when you get home, when you walk through that door, you're still going to be divorced.
Mm,
You're
yeah.
going to be all alone, and now what? What am I going to do
Yeah.
now?
Yeah,
Like, great.
that's an interesting, it's another step into the unknown, almost like when you started the
Yeah,
trail. It's like ending the
yeah,
trail. It's like a
yeah.
new
It
thing
was
of like, I don't know how this is gonna pan out, but it's coming.
it was very much that, and that's what led my thoughts, again, directly from the trail, realizing that, okay, here I am, um, on the trail. I did a lot of, well, my first degree is in psychology, and so I'm familiar with a number of different elements, books, and what have you, that I'm sure you may be, or our listeners or viewers may be familiar with: Leo Buscaglia, Stephen Covey, various others, in terms of, and Jewish tradition, as I already mentioned, about the forgiveness element, also has a lot to say, as Stephen Covey does, about the importance of goal setting and the
Mm,
importance of having a goal and having an objective and what have you. And from my perspective, about from the hike, the hike itself was a goal. Obviously, I had a goal, I had an objective. I wanted to hike the Israel Trail. And each day had a goal. I had to get to the night camp or wherever I was staying that night. And I had the overarching goal, as you can imagine, of getting my life back on track, after the divorce. But in those last few weeks, I started to put these thoughts together under almost a different rubric. You may be familiar with the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
okay.
Um,
I'll have to check it
Without
out.
going to, yeah, it's definitely worth reading. It's fascinating in one sentence, and it's almost a disservice to try and summarize it in one sentence.
Mhm.
Viktor Frankl experienced the Holocaust, was in a concentration camp, and developed in that concentration camp a whole new theory of psychological healing, which is based on, as the title implies, based on his observations that people who had a reason to live were more likely to survive the concentration camps than people who had given up and didn't have a specific explicit reason to live. So whether that reason was, I want to see my kids again, or I want to see my wife again, or that reason was, I want to take revenge against these bastard Nazis, or whether that reason was, I think I found a cure for cancer and I've got to get back to my research, or from Viktor Frankl's perspective, actually in these observations, developing what he ended up calling a whole new school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, basically describes the process and then the basis of this therapeutical approach, which fundamentally says, if you have a reason to live, if you have a goal that you've set, that kind of sense of purpose is what gives your life meaning.
That's so fascinating and
it
makes total sense in everything.
It really is. It really was. And I remembered that as I was hiking and thinking about the goals that I was achieving in terms of the hike and every day and for the whole hike and what have you, I was remembering back to Viktor Frankl's book, which I had studied back in college. And this idea of, I need to set some goals for myself. So I did. Those last 2 weeks were full as I was walking through more urban areas and through fields and up and down hills and along rivers and streams. I was thinking about, okay, what am I doing when I get home and I'm still divorced and I'm still alone? And when it was on the personal level of re-engaging, I've always been a very active and involved father, but even kind of upping my game with regard to being present and available for my kids, whether it was professional goals that I set in terms of where I wanted my career to head, and even a commitment that I would love again, a commitment and a belief in myself, having gone through this healing, that I would be able to love again. All of these were goals that I set for myself to give this kind of sense of purpose, a little bit of real detail and specificity, which would then enable me to really bring back meaning into my life. And that was that was basically the fifth element. So it basically all combines together from the humility and the acceptance, which engendered or led or helped to promote a sense of gratitude, and all three of those together, which enabled me to really forgive from the heart, and then putting all that together, focusing on the sense of purpose, which we have to give our life meaning. That basically is what enabled me to face my personal challenge. And in the end, one of the goals I set for myself was, I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to write up these experiences. Maybe others can benefit from these learnings. You don't have to strap on a 50-pound pack and hike the entire Israel Trail over the course of 2 months in order to understand and perhaps adopt some of these as techniques to meet our own personal challenges, whether it's a death in the family or whether it's losing our job or divorce, what have you. I can only say that these 5 elements, humility and acceptance, gratitude, forgiveness, and a sense of purpose, really were instrumental for me to heal and to move on with my life. And I've carried them with me ever since. And I've found from others that they can be helpful to many people who are facing their own personal challenges.
That is so heartwarming. And I'm so happy you kept a journal along the way too, even though you mentioned you didn't intend to make this a book. But I'm so happy you got to share these experiences with people, because I'm sure people reading this and hearing you talk in this episode as well too, they can relate so many things you're talking about to their own life and everything. I know just myself, I'm trying not to cut off everything you say, because it's making me think of different things and different lessons. And even I feel like listening to you talk to and having this conversation today, it's a very important episode to me too. I feel like I'm going to leave this and still be thinking about things you said. It's almost like I'm going to be processing other stuff later. And it's I want to say, like, thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge, not only with me but with other people, and publishing this book. It's just a beautiful thing, man. And yeah, I appreciate you. And
No, thank you for saying so, Sean. I mean, I'm
yeah.
really glad to be able to share it with you and with your listeners, because it kind of that's what it's all about. I think when we discover some sense of truth or understanding of our universe, and we find tools that are helpful to ourselves to meet our personal challenges, not sharing them almost seems beyond selfish. It almost seems
Yeah.
that you're actually squandering a gift that you've been given, and it lessens that. I think in a very, let's say, um, existential way. There's something about the balancing of forces in the universe that if I've been given, this incredible healing through these different elements, if I weren't going to share it, then that lessens somehow, the impact and their ability to help me continue on with my own journey. So I'm glad
Yeah.
to have had the opportunity with you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And also, you mentioned earlier, you're thinking about doing the trail again too. What is the motivation this time?
Oh, well, it's funny. Here, I have a copy of the book,
Awesome.
and in the acknowledgments, you can see that I refer to one particular individual. I mentioned now, kind of in general, that I felt towards the end of the trail that I was able to love again.
Mm.
And in the end, after coming back and settling back home and making some decisions and some of the other goals that I had set, I started to date. And what can I say? Love
Mhm.
found me. I was going to say I found love again, but the truth is, Miriam found me on the internet. And I met my wonderful and giving and caring and beautiful, intelligent, warm, supportive wife, Miriam. We've been married now for 6 years. We were
Oh, nice.
married back in 2015. It's a year we dated for a year, and we're married a year after a meeting. And so the one of the first things that I said to Miriam when we got engaged, not as a condition of getting married, but I said, I would really like to hike the trail again, and I would love to do it together.
Oh,
So
all right. Yeah.
at the time, I have three children. They're all married, and I now have six grandchildren. We have six grandchildren. At the time, only two out of my three children were married, and she has six children. At the time that we got married, her youngest was 14, and so she said,
Mm.
"Okay, we'll do the trail together. That's fine. Yes, Arya. Yes, dear. But let's wait until Yehuda, her youngest, was doing his national service, his military service in the IDF, because then he's kind of taken care of. He's in a framework. She wasn't going to just disappear for
Yeah.
a couple of
No,
months
no
while he's
worries and weights on her shoulders
right,
with that, like
right,
overthinking.
right,
Yeah.
right. While he's in high school. So just actually a year ago, he's been in the army now for almost 2 years. About a year ago, after he'd been in the army for about 9 months, I turned to him and I said, Miriam, Yehuda's doing his service now in the IDF, isn't he? She looked at me, she said, yeah. Like, where are we going with this? I said, well, you said when he's in
Yeah,
when
yeah,
he's in
just
the
poking her.
IDF,
It's like, hey, yeah,
that's right.
remember.
We're gonna hike the trail together. And she said, you can't scare me. That's not a problem. Whenever you want to
Yeah.
schedule it, we'll do it. So we're planning it. We were going to do it actually this October, but for a number of different reasons, we're putting it off slightly, probably until the spring or perhaps next October. But we are committed to do it again. And I think one of the motivations, first of all, I won't need a 50-pound pack this time because I'm a bit older. I'm going to allow myself an occasional bed and breakfast or what have you. I don't have
Oh,
to
yeah.
sleep. The original trip I did, I slept out under the stars, in the rough, in the field about 2/3 of the time. I'd imagine when Miriam and I do it together, and I'm nearing 60, and uh, She's not quite that, but we'll probably end up spending no more than half of the nights out. We'll also push ourselves less. We'll probably take 3 months to do it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's nice.
but the main motivation, I guess, was twofold. One is I really wanted to be able to enjoy it without the overlay of the emotional trauma that my
Mhm.
first experience contained. Now that I wouldn't trade what I went through for anything because of the lessons that I did learn and the whole world that it's opened up to me since then. But I would like to do it, and I'm looking forward to doing it with nothing but simcha, as we say in Hebrew, nothing but joy and happiness and fulfillment, without any of that overlay of the emotional baggage that I had to carry around with me, along with that 50-pound pack. Um, and, and
Yeah.
and the second thing is I really want to do it with Miriam, because although as an Israeli, she also has done a lot of hiking in the land of Israel. And she also enjoys this, this connection we have to our ancestral homeland. But to do it together means that this becomes then a shared experience, not one which I had and then constantly talk about. And she, jokingly, she knows a lot about it. She helped edit my book in the end.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, but this means that we could then build a kind of a shared experience of it'll be very different, but obviously a similar
Yeah, yeah.
trek on the Israel Trail, and have that then to reflect on for the rest of our lives together, please God.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And yeah, like going out there like with a different experience too, that's a different perspective. That's going to be more lessons you never thought you're going to learn, like
That's
stepping
right.
in,
That's
and you're
right.
probably going to
That's right.
learn even like a lot more about each other. And I think that's an amazing
Yeah.
idea, and that's
Yeah.
beautiful you
Very
two are
true.
doing that. That's great.
Thank you. I have to.
Yeah.
I'll report. I'll report back in when we do. We'll be in
Yeah,
touch
I
in a
was just gonna say,
couple of
like,
years.
pretty soon I got another recording with somebody, but I'd love to have you back after that and like catch up with you. But
I'd
because
certainly be
even I'm
be
thinking like
happy
right
to.
now I'm enjoying the conversation so much I could probably talk to you for like 5 hours if I didn't have something
Yeah, we
else
have to.
booked as well. But
Yeah, fair enough.
yeah, before we leave too, can you let people know like can they find you on social media, where they can find the book and all that if they want to follow your next
Yeah,
step and journey and or buy the book?
yeah, sure. So the book is My Israel Trail: Finding Peace in the Promised Land. And the website for My Israel Trail is, as the name sounds, www.myisraeltrail.com. Pretty simple. And there you can find some excerpts and photos and videos and recordings, what have you. I'm on Facebook. The book has a Facebook page, My Israel Trail. Um, I'm on Facebook as Aryeh Green. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. And the book's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and the Book Depository, etc. So if anybody wants an autographed copy, they can contact me directly. My email is also on the website, or it's aryeh.green, my name, at gmail.com. And I'm always happy to sign a book to somebody who's interested in a personal signed copy. And as long as, they'll cover the cost of postage, I'm happy to do it at the regular price. There's no premium to be
Oh,
to
that's
be
great.
paid
Yeah.
for a signed copy.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, your inspiration, the story. I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. This has been one of my favorites on the show, and I feel like a
Oh,
lot,
thank you.
and not just feel like, I know a lot of people are going to enjoy this one and hearing about your journey. So thanks again. And yes, like once again, I mentioned, I'll keep in touch. I'll get you on Instagram, and hopefully we can do this down the road again.
Okay, I would be delighted to, Sean. Thank you. Thanks for your time. I've really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, anytime. Have a great night.
Okay, you too.
Hope all you guys enjoyed this wonderful episode with Aryeh Green. That was just one of those wonderful conversations that make me feel really good. And like we mentioned, you can find the book My Israel Trail available everywhere where books are sold. And I'll actually have the link to that on the page for this episode on our website at www.thecreativeimbalance.com. And while you're there, go check out some other episodes. Lots of great talks and more to come. But before we take off, I want to thank all you legends on the Patreon. First up, the co-producer, Jeremy Hopkin of Hopkin Design. The Queen, Ola Mazuka of Sonic Fold. Ryan Watkins of Ryan Radio. Amanda McKnight of Top 10 Nerd. Pat Maloney, Ryan Campbell, Daniel San, Drew Stewart, Devin Staple, Mike Ulio, David Kearney, Jared Pepper Bronstein, aka Mr. Spicy, and last but not least, Francis Kopfer, aka my mom. Thanks again to everybody who listened to this episode, and we'll catch you again real soon. Peace!